Welcome to episode 104 of OTD, your daily dose of soccer history by the 17 Laws Guy. It's February 12, 2007, and the night, in a house in Jena, Georg Buschner quietly passes at 81. For most football fans, his name lives inside one match, Hamburg, 1974, Sparwasser, East Germany 1, West Germany 0. But if you reduce Buschner to a single goal, you miss the bigger story, because for a full decade, the 1970s, East Germany built something strange, efficient, and quietly world-class, behind the Iron Curtain, under state amateurism, with the Stasi never far away. And Buschner, a defender turned academic turned coach, is the man who made it all cohere. But how did we get here? We start with a contradiction at the heart of Cold War sport. The Olympic rulebook insisted on amateurs for decades, and the Eastern Bloc mastered the loophole. Players who were soldiers or workers on paper, and full-time athletes in reality. We touched on that in episode 24, when Olympic football became a Cold War laboratory, and how Eastern Europe could send their best, while the West increasingly could not. East Germany, the GDR, took that logic and turned it into a system. Talent identification, sports science, centralized training, and an unspoken security layer, the Stasi, tracking athletes, officials, and the risk every trip abroad carried, defection. Georg Buschner sits right in the middle of that world. Buschner is born in Gera in 1925. He becomes a defender, plays top-flight football for Motor Jena, but his second life begins even before his first ends. He studies sport and history, teaches at a university, and by 1958, he's already coaching in Jena. His football is built on preparation, a physical, contact-heavy game, but trained like a science, repeatable, measurable, disciplined. He drags sports science into the daily routine, and critics later complain he sacrifices Spielkultur for structure, but nobody doubts the team is fit, organized, and hard to play against. From 1958 to 71, he shapes Zeiss Jena into an elite East German side, a cup win in 60, and league titles in 63, 68, and 70. That's not a footnote. That's the factory where many of his national team habits are forged. But in the GDR, nothing is ever only sport. And here the story gets uncomfortable. Official records show that from 1966 to 71, Buschner worked as an inoffizieller Mitarbeiter, an unofficial Stasi collaborator, under the codename Georg. That doesn't automatically tell you what he reported or whom he harmed, but it does tell you where the system's lines were drawn. Even the country's top coach was inside the security apparatus. So when people ask, did he really stop in 1971? The honest answer is, the files show the formal collaboration window, and the wider reality is that the Stasi didn't pack up and leave football in 1971. In 1970, Buschner takes the national team job, and now his work becomes bigger than Jena. East Germany's mission is prestige, proof that the system can produce excellence. By the early 1970s, Buschner's side is tough, organized, and athletic. In 1972, they land on the Olympic podium, bronze in Munich, shared after a 2-2 draw with the Soviets. In 1976, they go one better, Olympic gold in Montreal, beating Poland 3-1 in the final. And then there's 1974. West Germany hosts the World Cup. East Germany qualifies for the only time in its history. And suddenly, the two Germanys are in the same group. We covered the club version of this Cold War collision in episode 6, Bayern versus Magdeburg, two systems meeting over two legs. But Hamburg is different. Hamburg is a state staring into a mirror. June 22nd, 1974, Volksparkstadion. The West Germans are expected to win. The East Germans are expected to survive. What happens instead is one of the most loaded goals in football history. Jürgen Sparwasser breaks through and scores. East Germany wins 1-0. For the GDR, it is a perfect photograph, the underdog socialist state beating the host, the capitalist class enemy, on Western soil. For the players, it's a football memory for life. For Buschner, it's the peak, the night his structure holds under maximum pressure. And yet, the story doesn't end in Hamburg, because Buschner's East Germany keeps winning in the arena that GDR could best exploit, Olympic football. And there's one more gem that almost nobody remembers. In 1975, East Germany goes to Caracas and wins the Pequeña Copa del Mundo, an invitational tournament that, in a different era, had called itself a Little Club World Cup. In the final, the GDR selection beats Boavista 2-1. Not Hamburg, but another stamp that this team could travel and win. So what? Buschner's GDR team becomes the most successful state amateur national project of the 1970s, a second round run at the 1974 World Cup, Olympic bronze in 72, Olympic gold in 76, and, under the same system, Olympic silver in 1980. But the model starts to crack. By the late 1970s, Buschner's relationship with officials and players deteriorates. Politics thickens. And in 1981, after a loss to Poland, Buschner is removed, and in true Cold War fashion, he learns of his dismissal from the press. That's the brutal logic of a controlled system. You're celebrated like an architect until you're treated like a replaceable cog. And the larger trend is even more decisive. As football globalizes, as money, television, and professionalization accelerate, state amateurism becomes less loophole and more competitive disadvantage. The West is building markets. The East is protecting narratives. Then 1981 happens. The wall falls. The GDR collapses. And a football world that once felt parallel becomes almost overnight history. So what happens to Buschner in that new world? He remains respected and complicated. His Stasi link is not erased by medals. After reunification, he even works briefly as a talent scout for Werder Bremen, a detail that tells you how quickly football's borders changed. Buschner passes on February 12, 2007 in Jena, the city where he built his club legacy, and the place where East German football, in many ways, still lives as memory. He leaves behind the most successful decade in the history of a national team that no longer exists. 3 things to take away from February 12, 2007. First, East Germany's golden decade wasn't an accident. It was constructed with planning, sports science, and a ruthless clarity of purpose, and Buschner was the engineer. Second, the Olympics were not a sideshow in the Cold War. They were a battleground, and state amateurism gave the East a real advantage until the professional tide made the entire idea untenable. And third, Buschner's legacy is inseparable from the Stasi shadow. The records don't cancel the football, and the football doesn't cleanse the records. That tension is the truth of East German sport. On this day, in 2007, Georg Buschner died, the coach behind the Iron Curtain, and the man who gave the GDR its greatest football chapter. That's all for episode 104 of OTD, your daily dose of soccer history by 17 Laws Guy. If you enjoyed this show, follow it, rate it, and share it with a football friend. Find us on LinkedIn, and for story suggestions, corrections, or leads, email me at otd@17lawsguy.com. Tomorrow, episode 105, February 13, 2000, AFCON, a penalty shootout, and Nigeria's 4th kick, where the ball passed the line, only to be disallowed, and Cameroon then lifted the trophy. See you then, as I take you inside that drama.